everybody, and welcome back to another brand new video where today we are concluding season 13 of Doctor Who in my classic Doctor Who reviews. We're looking back at the Seeds of Doom. So this, of course, not to get confused with the season 6 story, The Seeds of Death, featuring Patrick Troughton's Doctor. The Seeds of Doom, as I mentioned, is the final story of season 13, Tom Baker's second season as the Doctor, and I think this really is a proper Doctor Who classic. It's the second and final story to be penned by Robert Banks-Stewart after he previously wrote the opening story to this season, Terror of the Zygons. This is another very much action-orientated, Earth-based story that in many ways feels almost like a mini James Bond movie, I think it's often been described as, and I can very much see the vibes behind that here. I think that one of the great benefits of this story is the ranging locations that are included. There's a huge amount of location filming in this story, albeit on outside broadcast cameras rather than film, which does take away a little bit from the outdoor scenes because you're just so used to the look of film, and when you've got OB videotape sort of outdoors, it doesn't look quite the same, but it's not a major problem. And so yeah, having just having it almost the story split into two, I think, with episodes 1 and 2 being almost solely set in Antarctica, well, a quarry in Dorset, or wherever it was, Surrey maybe, I think a Surrey quarry, but Antarctica, and then having the last 4 episodes set in Athelhampton House in Dorset, which was just such a lovely change of pace in the way things are set, I think, and just makes it a much more, although it's a 6-part story, I think by having such differing settings between the first 2 and the last 4, it just makes the story go a lot quicker, because it doesn't feel like you're stuck in the same location for 6 whole episodes. It feels like you almost had 2 stories put together into one, really, I think, which just adds so much to this story, I think. So yes, those first 2 episodes, almost set solely in Antarctica, are so sort of fascinatingly mysterious and intriguing, and quite sort of sinister and almost horror aspects to it, as we learn about this mysterious pod that's been discovered, that's mutating or sort of have something come out of it that's going to infect people and turn them into giant alien weeds. It's basically the idea behind it, and having this sort of gradually mutating person who's been infected by the crinoid, gradually taking over, killing people, going out and desperately trying to just find and kill anybody, and then getting blown up at the end of episode 2 when seemingly the Doctor and Sarah are going to get blown up as well at the end of episode 2, is a great way to kind of keep the interest through these first 2 episodes, very much setting up what's later to happen in the story, introducing the character of Scorby, the Harrison Chase's henchman, really, who's just desperately there to try and get the pod and get it back to his boss, Harrison Chase, who's a plant nutter, is probably the best way to describe him. So Scorby's just a cracking character throughout, played by John Challis, who's famous, of course, for Only Fools and Horses, being a character in that. But he's a great actor. He's a real fun character, I think, in this story. Just sort of the hilarious moments between the Doctor and Scorby, it's this sort of general frustration by Scorby as he keeps on seemingly has killed the Doctor and then actually hasn't. He comes back, seemingly killed him again, comes back and just goes back and forth, round and round in circles until Scorby goes a bit mad in episode 6 and gets himself killed by all the plants. I have to say that the character of Harrison Chase, who is the sort of main villain of this story, is one of my favourite villains in a long time. I just love the fact that he's so completely crazy, completely obsessed with his plants and building his collection, and will stop at nothing for plants to become superior, gets sort of infected and absorbed by the crinoids towards the end of the story in terms of being controlled by them, basically. And just some of the nutty scenes where he's making music for the plants because he thinks that they need to be able to, it sort of makes them feel better and encourages them to grow or whatever, or just because plants have emotions and things and he wants to give them that back, and that plants should be the dominant race on Earth, not the humans, and that the plants should eat the humans, and just the craziness with which he sort of pursues all of this. His nutty composting machine, which is a really dark idea, but feeding humans into composting machines and going to have them all crushed is, pretty dark. But then having the moment at the end, of course, where he gets sucked up by them is also a pretty dark way for him to die and be left from the show. It's definitely a story that benefits from its use of location filming combined with excellent set design. I think all of the Antarctica stuff is genuinely convincing, although a lot of it is just a quarry with a load of fake snow dumped over some stones and rocks and stuff to try and create an Antarctica-type landscape, and then just a load of sets and models and things like that. But actually, I felt like throughout those 2 episodes in particular, I was pretty convinced we were in Antarctica. The acting was well enough done when they were sort of supposedly outside in the freezing cold to kind of believe, with the fake snow and the sound effects and things, to be able to sort of believe that I'm actually in Antarctica and that's or we're in this super cold place. I felt like that kind of worked, and then having Athelhampton House for the last 4 episodes for Harrison Chase's estate, I thought was an excellent location that really presented them with so many opportunities to film different aspects, and meant that so much of it was able to be done out on location, because there were so many great gardens to be running around and sort of driveways to come up, different shots and angles of the house from different places and things. There was just so much that was able to be done with that location to really give it a more real feel, an easier way to buy into this story, I think, because you just believe in the location. I think that's something where I kind of somewhat struggled with Brain and Morbius, was just the lack of location filming made it a little bit more difficult for me to buy into believing and understanding the sort of scale of where I am, particularly when you're inside sort of the castle in the Brain and Morbius. You kind of weren't that convinced by it, because you saw, I think there's only 1 or 2 shots of the exterior, a model exterior of that place, to be able to believe where you are, whereas with this you're so ingrained into where you are because you keep seeing the wide shots, whether it's models or real wide location shots of the house. It just made that so much more convincing, I think, and made it more exciting for that very reason. And there were some really cracking model shots of seeing the crinoid getting larger and larger and larger and engulfing the house, basically, in those shots. Of course, yeah, you can see it's a model, but I still thought it would have worked really, really well and looked really, really cool, and just looked so kind of sinister. And just the gradual building up of the crinoid throughout the story, really, well, this their second crinoid, after the one's been destroyed in Antarctica, as he's gradually mutating, building up, the shots inside that little sort of outhouse, I guess you'd call it, was really well done initially, and then him escaping, getting larger and larger, and sort of killing a few people and things and going around and everything. It was really, really effectively done. It was very sort of almost horror-esque, I think, in moments there, where the sort of creeping up the crinoid, and it just sort of the gradual mutating of it as well, and you becoming more and more plant-like in the way you are, and eventually controlling all the plants around there, and people getting strangled by plants and all of that. There were some such great ideas down in there, I think, that are really, some of them not fully explored, like the sort of strangling plants of other people around the local area was the sort of idea I think initially explored in there, but that was just in a report rather than it actually being seen. And I think that's something that maybe could have been explored more, but just as an idea is really, really sinister but cool. One of the key things that this story is notable for is it truly is the final appearance for UNIT in Doctor Who. Well, not the final appearance, but it's the final appearance until Battlefield in 1989, season 26, the final season of Classic Who. That's their only other appearance in the classic series kind of properly, apart from a very brief sort of appearance in the Five Doctors. But outside of that, this really is, although unfortunately it's a real shame there's none of the normal UNIT team, sort of the Brigadier or Sergeant Benton or Mike Yates or Harry even, or anybody like that. None of them are unfortunately able to be involved with this story, and so it means that UNIT do kind of just become a bit of a bland, kind of faceless military organisation that just saves the day by destroying the crinoid, but doesn't really have any real emotional connection because they're not using any of those characters. So it was a shame that this ended up being the final story that UNIT were ever used in. Well, pretty much in the classic series, certainly for a very, very long time, and kind of the final cap off of the John Pertwee UNIT era, which had been gradually over these couple of seasons been sort of pulled further and further away from having any involvement with the UNIT. But I feel like as this fundamentally is the very, very last time that UNIT are properly involved until the very end of Classic Who. And yeah, so it does feel like a kind of significant moment when you know that fact, that I know this is the last time I'm going to see UNIT in any form until season 26. And only then it's for one story when we get to that. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame. It definitely doesn't feel like a UNIT story like they used to. Of course it doesn't, because they're very much just brought in at the end of episode 5 and episode 6 to just save the day, and that's all their real involvement is. And I think that's okay. I don't think that makes sense. That was the reason they were involved in the plot, but it does mean that although UNIT are involved, it does not feel in any way like a normal UNIT story. But it's just, yeah, a notable thing that for any future Earth-based stories, there's not going to be UNIT involved. They're not a thing in any of those stories. That's it. That's the final hurrah for UNIT. As I often say with particularly 6-part Doctor Who stories, it's always important how fast, how quickly the story flows, the general pacing of it, and whether it feels like it's a real drag to watch. And for me, this was probably one of the best paced stories I can remember watching of Classic Who. I watched all 6 parts in one go, in a 2.5 hour sit down, and it didn't feel slow or boring really at any point, quite frankly. It felt like there was always enough new things happening, enough change going on, enough action involved to keep me really engaged, and it didn't just end up in really long, laborious kind of dialogue scenes where there's not really anything exciting happening for a 25-minute episode. Nothing really progresses and it's just a load of waffling. I'm really pleased that this story doesn't go down that route, and it just, I think Robert Banks Stewart was just a much more action-orientated writer. That was more the sort of stuff he'd done for writing for film, I think, and things like that. And so it's noticeable in Terror of the Zygons, and again in this story, The Seas of Doom, how much just action scenes with the Doctor and Sarah kind of running around the gardens, being chased around and things like that. Being chased in Antarctica as well is a great moment, of course, and just different things inside the house as well. And the attack of the crinoid at the very end of the story. There's a lot of different aspects there that introduce more action to this story, but in a way where you can still have enough dialogue and story in it, but just flavour it with enough action to keep it interesting throughout, and I think it just really does strike the perfect balance in the story. And I do just think like it's a fundamentally cool and interesting and good plot that it's having these pods that have come from outer space where you sort of, they open up, infect people and turn them into giant weeds, human-eating weeds, but which is a good storyline on its own, but wouldn't kind of maybe make a 6-part story. But then you add in the nutty plant owner, Harrison Chase, who's obsessed with getting these plants and being able to use them, and have them his collection, these priceless plants that actually are going to just cause havoc with the world, and his pure determination to do anything to get hold of it and control it is such a great, just adds a great villain into the programme, and I think really just helps to create an overall plot that really doesn't feel like it's lacking in any real department, I think. So I was really, really pleased from that point of view. And then from a visual perspective, I think in general the Crinoid looks really, really good. There's obviously a couple of lesser good moments in some of the sort of developments of the costume, I think, and maybe the model shot of the Crinoid doesn't always look brilliant, but I think as a whole it looks pretty damn good, and combined with that is the score by Jeffrey Burgon, who only scored this story and Terror of the Zygons. They were the only 2 stories he ever did, but I think this is another really strong score. It really gives... There's a lot more music than a lot of stories in Classic Who, it has to be said. It's one of the rare stories in the 70s not to be composed by Dudley Simpson. And I think he really does a really good job. He talked about sort of using one specific instrument to get the sound of the Antarctic and the sort of icy sound almost. I think it is the very cold, harsh, icy sound that really sort of punctuates that part of the story, and then the sort of more dramatic moments of that are required in the later story. But also I found really interesting his idea of you don't want to try and top the moment of action with the music. That's almost not always necessary. So sort of the moment where I think there's a moment where the Doctor knocks out the driver of the car, the music keeps building up, and then just before he punches him, it just stops, and then he gives the punch, and it's just kind of, rather than taking the focus away from what's on screen and more into the telling you how to feel with the music, it's building up to that dramatic moment and then letting the scene talk for itself and giving the drama itself, I think, which is a really interesting idea. I think it's something that's rather underrated nowadays in scoring sort of TV and film, is there's such an emphasis on the music's got to be epic to match what's happening on screen. Well, why not sometimes build it up, but then stop it and just let the scene and the visuals and the dialogue or whatever it is sort of speak for itself and not feel like it has to be punctuated and supported by a bit of dramatic music in there as well. That was something that really struck me, particularly being, as I hope you guys know, a audio production and music tech student at the moment at university. So just thinking about those kind of musical ideas are really, really interesting to me. So yeah, that was just something I noticed which was quite interesting. But yeah, so overall as a story, as I said at the beginning, it's probably my favourite Tom Baker story that I've watched up until this point in my reviews. And through season 12 and season 13, I'd probably say it's one of my absolute favourite Tom Baker stories. It really just ticks all the boxes for me in being a really exciting, a good plot, a really exciting action-orientated story that really is a 6-parter that really just flies along at a great pace with some great characters and just an overall brilliant story. But guys, please do let me know in the comments below what you thought of this story, whether it is one of your favourites of the Tom Baker era, whether you're not so much of a fan. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say on it down in the comments below. But apart from that, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video. As always, hit that like button, that subscribe button if you're new here, and I'll see you again very soon for a brand new one. Goodbye.